Welcome back to Stories Sustain Us, the podcast where we celebrate extraordinary individuals who are making the world a better place. You know, storytelling is the thread that weaves human connection, shaping how we see the world and how we build communities. It's not just about facts and figures. Narratives give meaning to our experience and influence the way we engage with people and the places around us. In today's episode, we'll explore the power of storytelling, the importance of belonging, and why community engagement must be more than just checking a box. My guest today, Leilah Powell, has spent her career working to empower communities, ensuring that voices, especially those that have been historically marginalized, are heard and valued. She understands that true systems change isn't just about data, but about the stories that shape our understanding of the world. Leilah is a proud native of San Antonio and has dedicated her career to community development. She's worked across the nonprofit, public, and private sectors, including roles with Bank of America, the San Antonio Housing Trust, the Brackenridge Park Conservancy, and the City of San Antonio, where she served as chief of policy for two separate mayors. Her expertise has helped shape policies and projects that improve urban life, and her leadership has extended to serving on multiple boards, including the American Institute of Architects San Antonio and the Texas chapter of American Planning Association. With a master's degree in community and regional planning from the University of Texas School of Architecture and a bachelor's degree from Stanford, Leilah brings a wealth of knowledge, experience, and passion to her work. But beyond her impressive resume, I have the privilege of calling Leilah a dear friend. We first met in 2001 when we worked together in the mayor's office. And from that time on, I've had firsthand experience witnessing her brilliance. More importantly, though, I know her to be one of the kindest and most compassionate people I've ever met. I'm grateful for our long-standing friendship, and I'm honored that she's joining me today on Stories Sustain Us. So get ready for a thought-provoking conversation about community, connection, and the power of storytelling. Let's dive in here on Stories Sustain Us, where we are inspiring action through the power of storytelling. Hey, Leilah, how are you? Welcome to Stories Sustain Us. Good to see you.
I'm so excited to be here. It's great to see you after all these years.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking time and joining me and speaking with me. I just kind of introduced you and told everybody we're longtime friends and have a long history together. So it's great to see you. It's always wonderful to chat with you. So, but thank you for taking time to join me on the show and share your story and the work that you're doing. So I appreciate all that you do and appreciate your time.
Thank you for inviting me. And this is a topic that I think a lot about, both for the work that we do here professionally with LISC, Local Initiative Support Corporation, with our San Antonio office, but also personally from a lot of different angles. The way that communities come together around narrative, but also even to get really into the geeky heart of it right away. Like, what are the neurological substrates that allow us even to tell a story,
right,
and to put a narrative together? That gets to this question of consciousness. How are we able to be creatures that do this? Because as far as we know, we're really the only creatures that do have this capacity.
Yeah.
I think some others do.
Yeah.
but we don't have proof right now because we can't talk to them really.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely theories out there that other creatures definitely communicate, but we may be the only unique ones that have this ability to tell stories, whether true stories or fictional stories. We have this thing that maybe other creatures don't have, which makes us a little unique.
Yeah. Well, really. So what you're doing is you're doing a podcast about what makes us human.
I think so. And how do we take that humanness and recognize that we're connected to everything else, which is what sustainability is. How are we going to live on this planet with each other and with everything else? My premise here is storytelling is key to that. Is how do we connect with each other is through stories, and how are we going to live on this planet is by helping each other survive in that storytelling.
I think there's so much evidence. So looking at folks who are working in areas like psychology and evolutionary biology, there's so much evidence that what you just said is in fact true, that raw data or facts or compelling rational arguments. The Cartesian cogito ergo sum, right? So I'm thinking, and therefore I know that I'm human, and I'm that we missed the piece where people have overarching narratives about belonging, about who they
Yep.
are, about
Yep.
themselves and the community they belong to. And then unless you tap into those, that your best case is not going to be compelling, that in fact, great data can retrench people
Right.
into bad positions.
Exactly.
And
Think
yeah,
flat
and it's that
earthers.
sense of belonging and community that's hardwired into us.
Right.
Bacteria, which have no nervous systems, obviously, and no ability to put something into a narrative, or bacteria respond chemically differently to unrelated bacteria than they do to related bacteria.
Yeah.
So who are we to think that we can get away from billions of years of evolution of creatures and to sidestep something that I think is hardwired into us, is the need to be part of a community,
Yeah.
and
Connection.
to treat members of your community differently than folks who you perceive as not being in your community.
Yeah. That sense of belonging is an absolute primal need in us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
how do we then create these narratives where we can create the largest group of belonging so that we can collaborate together and move forward together, as opposed to being in constant competition and or war? Like, take it to the extreme. Like, how do we create a sense of belonging where we're together with the largest number of us?
So I know we're supposed to talk about like me and
Yes.
stuff like that, but
Yes.
the word you just used, which is really interesting, and we don't break it down sometimes, but the idea of collaboration and co-laboring. So there's a really wonderful thinker who was with the Max Planck Institute for years, but he's at Duke now. His name is Michael Tomasello, and he writes about intentionality. And his field of study is comparative development between primates and humans.
Yeah.
And he looks at the ability of humans to develop what he calls joint intentionality, which we really don't see elsewhere in the animal world. I think, and this is probably a topic near and dear to the hearts of people in your part of the world, more so than our part of the world, but I think that orcas have joint intentionality. I think that they teach each other, which other animals don't do. I think that they develop culture. So I'm not saying this is a uniquely human thing, but I do think that it is key to our humanness.
Yeah.
And experimentally, you can look at, do primates, do other animals establish group norms? Very young children are able to establish group norms.
Yeah.
They're able to understand that there is a project or a process going on, and that they are part of it when they join the group, and that when they leave the group, they have to say, "I'm leaving," or else you're violating the group norms of working together and collaborating.
Yeah.
So, to me, that's that critical branching off point. Why are humans done the great and terrible things that we do? Because we have joint intentionality. We are not simply acting on our own information or the awareness that there are other actors out there, which is critical.
Right.
But we're in the I know that you know that I know situation.
Absolutely. Well, I could, as you said, geek out on this stuff for hours with you, because this is part of my passion and why I'm doing the show, and I love where we're going already, but let me steer it into you a little bit, so that we can kind of learn your story, and I'm sure as we get into the professional aspect of what you're currently doing, we can maybe talk about some of these other ideas again and bring them in. But what's your story, Leilah? Where did you grow up, and how did you get to this position in your life and passions that you have? So tell me a little bit about you.
Well, I'm talking to you from San Antonio, Texas today, and that's where I grew up. I went off to school in a couple different places, but I grew up here, and I have one sister, and we're very close. We're a year apart. So we were always sort of a tag team. And our parents were older when we were born. They didn't have close friends who had kids our age, and we didn't have relatives who were our age.
Yeah.
So my sister and I did a lot of things with our parents, and our parents were very engaged in this, almost the same discussion we've been having. How do you define a community? How do you recognize and build a community that responds to the needs of the people who are in it from slightly different perspectives? So they were both trained as architects and planners, and my mother was an instructor in the urban studies program at Trinity University for years.
Yeah.
And so at Trinity, she did a lot of work with their graduate students in their urban studies program, which was, interestingly enough, there's kind of a reflection of this dichotomy here. When you think about folks who are going into local government, you often think of public administration programs where you're learning cost-benefit analysis. And,
sure.
Well, so an urban studies program is a little more, it's almost like the equivalent of a sort of liberal arts degree in municipal issues. And I think that was the intent of the program, was it was also the first program headed by a Black PhD in the country around municipal issues, and Dr. Earl Lewis. And part of the goal of the program was to say, if folks are going to be making decisions about growing cities, they need to have an understanding, they need to have lived expertise from a variety of cultural backgrounds, economic backgrounds, racial and ethnic backgrounds. And I don't think at that time you really saw that.
No,
back
still don't in some places.
Still don't. So they had a very diverse group of students across all those dimensions.
Yeah.
They had good scholarship support. They encouraged women in the program, Black and Hispanic students in the program, and that was part of the preparation to kind of take a more humanist approach. I don't know that they ever said that, but I'll say it.
Yeah.
It wasn't all of it. So the coursework and curriculum, but it starts with making sure that you're including the right people.
Yeah.
So that was with the work my mom was doing, and she often was involved in issues in the community, discussions around water preservation, around neighborhood redevelopment. And my dad was an architect who did a lot of work with urban planning and campus planning. And he and my mom actually worked together on some campus master plans.
Nice.
So that idea of what is design, how does design serve people? How does design reflect a community? How does design build community? Are you creating the right spaces for people to come together safely? Those are things that we actually grew up talking about.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of how, when you and I first met each other, we were working in the mayor's office. We were all, I don't know, we were 12 or something. It was like a long time ago.
Certainly felt like we were in preteen years. Yes.
Yeah. So I think I knew a lot more back then. Like, I am sure that I knew the answers to all these questions
it's
back
funny
then.
how that works. I probably knew a lot more back then too. Yes.
25 years later on, I'm still seeing those basic questions play out.
Yeah.
And also even making the case to folks about why it matters.
Yeah.
Why does it matter that we think about these questions? And why does it matter that we work on connecting to the existing community? Because I think there are places where the story is just, let's get the newest and the best, and we'll attract people from elsewhere. And,
Sure. Or, even worse in government settings where it's a check the box. It's just we held one public meeting, so therefore we connected with the public. I mean, so it's there's still some old bad habits that are out and about and used frequently still in the world. So,
and it's really interesting, Stephen, when you mentioned the sort of check the box or we held a public meeting. One of the discussions that we have frequently with folks here in San Antonio is this idea that there's a continuum of collaboration, engagement.
Right. Should be.
From basically ignoring folks to truly empowering.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the, I think, pressure points that we have right now is that we use language very imprecisely. and this question of what are you encouraging people to think, and what are they hoping for versus what they get out of the process.
Yeah.
So if you talk about, well, we're going to do community engagement and we're going to collaborate, people expect that their ideas will go into practice.
Sure.
So don't use that language lightly. If you're really only taking their concerns under advisement, or they will inform your action, then don't use words like collaborate if really you're talking about. So we're trying to normalize looking at that spectrum. And maybe you don't even, certainly in like emergency situations, we're closing the street down. We're not taking your input.
Yeah, your feet. You can tell us later what you thought of it, but we have an emergency to deal with right now. Right.
Yeah. But if you're talking about truly empowering a group, then that means you are transferring power to them.
Yeah.
You are, and that's scary. And it's not something you just wake up one morning and say, well, let's let citizens manage the budget process. They don't have the skills to do that.
Right.
So it's something you plan for, but don't, you certainly don't want to encourage people to think that we're going to skip to giving you total control over this before you're actually ready to do that. And if you are in fact building up false hope, then that's actually, you're still digging the hole deeper of citizen disengagement.
Come back and get you in a bad way. Absolutely. If you build up this idea that someone's input will actually influence what the plan is going to say or what the final product is going to be, and they provide their input, and you not only don't respond and reply to whatever they said, but then you totally ignore it, that just further drives the wedge between the policymakers and the implementers and the citizens are supposed to be serving, the residents of the community they're supposed to be serving. That just
and I'll say this because I know this relates to your professional background as well and what you do for your day job. The other issue is that people who work in government or public service, we know and we're really aware of the multiple layers of agencies and entities that we all interact with.
Yeah.
So even, a particular service district, like a river authority, a county, a city, a state government. But for just an average, person who's out there taking care of their kids and getting to work and going to school,
right?
They don't interact with all those folks at a daily. They may get a tax bill and see all this and think, what am I paying for? But for them, the idea that you go through one planning process and then a year later somebody else goes through a planning process and I already told you all this and none of this happened, and yet all of our particular agencies have charges on us from our funders or our federal regulators to go through these processes. They're not integrated, they're not coordinated, and I think it's exhausting. And it's really incumbent on us, to do a better job.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, you mentioned your time at the mayor's office, that where you and I met 20 plus years ago at this point. How did you get to that point from, having conversations with your parents about, how do you build an inclusive community, both from a policy perspective from your mom and, design and architectural perspective from your father, and you have these, imagine, wonderful conversations growing up in your preteen and high school years. And so how did you then make that leap to eventually coming back to San Antonio and working for then Mayor Garza?
So it's something you and I have chatted about in the past, about the importance of, while we're talking about words and narrative and stories today, neither one of us discounts the science behind the work that we're doing.
Absolutely.
And I spent a whole, number of years in labs, irradiating paramecia, changing cultures, trying to understand the damage it was being, so I took a sort of science detour, but at some point I realized I really don't want to be alone in a lab. And that is, that's a path. Now you have colleagues but you're really working, there's a lot of internal work that goes on in science. And simultaneously I was doing a lot of theater, actually. So this idea of connecting with a large group of people, telling stories, basically, collectively, collaboratively, which is what distinguishes, live theater from recordings. And And at some point I figured out that what I was, really interested in was that idea about community. How do we work in community? How do we accomplish things in community? And so I took a little other diversion in college and did my undergraduate degree basically in Roman history. So
it's a little different than scientific lab work.
Well, people would ask me, well, how'd you get to the mayor's office from doing classics? And I said, well, yeah, I spent years studying a thriving global almost civilization.
Yeah.
And that built great cities, that we saw a lack of engagement with citizens in their cities, and the cities began to deteriorate and their empire fell apart. I guess there's no connection,
no correlation there at all. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I didn't mean to imply that I don't have a conspiracy theory idea that the Romans were active in Mesoamerica, but for the world that they had contact with, they were pretty much it.
Yeah, they had a pretty big hand in a chunk of the world at their height. Yes.
So kind of after doing all that, I ended up saying I do want to go back to graduate school, and I am interested in this idea of cities and how cities are built, and whether it's possible to intervene in issues through policy, kind of like these contrasting theories of history. Is it possible? Is the great man theory? Are there women and men who can really make a change, or are things going to happen the way they're happening because of
Sure.
Kind of cultural predeterminism? And I would say we saw a mixed bag of that when we were at the city, but enough to keep my appetite whetted for thinking, I like this. I like policy development. So I had been with a lender. So the money piece of the equation is critical. You can't ignore it.
100%.
But I do find that the money piece can fall in place if you've got the community relationships and the building of the infrastructure first.
Yeah.
But I was with a bank, and then I was with a nonprofit that did work in the housing sphere, and then I had the opportunity to join the mayor's team, and then was back in the mayor's office a few years ago with another mayor.
Yeah.
And in between there, ran a nonprofit, had a couple kids,
full life.
Did some teaching.
Yeah.
Did some consulting work. And essentially the consulting work I was doing actually was around the question that you're asking, which is folks would come to me and say, hey, we're not connecting somehow. The organizations that we think we're supposed to be working with don't see us as a partner. Internally, we're not working well together. What's wrong? Like, we thought we set this up. Why isn't this? Why aren't we producing the results or having the relationships?
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of discussion with, sitting down with folks and saying, tell me what you understand about what's going on here.
Yeah.
And that was really more so than looking at, someone's fundraising or their organizational structure. It was really listening to people talk about what their concerns were.
Yeah.
And how they were feeling about a situation.
Yep. That's a piece that's often missed as we think we know the answers and tell people what they should or should be doing. We forget to listen to what their interpretation of that information is. And I really appreciate what you said. How are they feeling about it?
Yeah.
We think we're these rational creatures that make rational decisions, and we're not. We're emotional creatures that most of our decisions are based on how we're feeling at that moment in time.
And we may not even be aware.
Correct.
So I don't know if you're familiar with Jonathan Haidt. I don't know if you've read Jonathan Haidt's work.
No,
if you haven't, Haidt.
Yeah.
If you haven't read it, go read it now.
Will do.
You'll be going, oh yeah, that's right. That's the explanation for what I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And I know there are folks who quibble with, and I'm lucky. I'm in a position where I know enough about science that I can read some of these general science books, but I don't know so much that I get stuck on details of that
debating
might be
it
wrong or I can take in the big concept and I love this and not be thinking, well, that statistically it might not be as
Yeah, that's the boat I'm into.
Yeah. I think there is some really great science writing out there.
Yes.
And I know a lot of people get turned off by the idea of reading something that they had to study in school. But that aha moment when you say, oh, that's why people do that, or that's how that works, that's just so fabulous. And again, that's a discussion about how do you tell a story in a way that someone can understand,
Right.
as opposed to laying out, the chemical basis for why bacteria do that thing.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So you've had this meandering career that has touched on in a lot of different places, largely in San Antonio.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about, you're at Local Initiative Support Corporation, the San Antonio branch of that national. There it is. Yes, get the plug in. So tell me a little bit about what the organization is that you're working for now, because I believe it's a national organization, and you lead up the San Antonio branch of that. So tell me a little bit about what it is that you do nationally, as well as what it is that you're kind of heading up in the San Antonio area.
LISC nationally, we were founded in the 1970s. We have 38 offices across the country. We do a whole variety of things relating to providing resources and financing and technical assistance into communities to help them realize their aspirations, for themselves. And that ranges from work with our affiliates that do low-income housing tax credits and new market tax credits, to policy work in DC, to working with the NFL. I mean, there's a very broad range of projects and products that LISC offers, and that's partly because 38 major cities are all different from each other.
Yeah,
so
sure. Imagine that.
Yeah, our issues in San Antonio are different than our Puget Sound office issues.
Yeah,
different than our DC issues, and so locally, we work on building wealth, health, and power for communities that have been excluded and systematically disadvantaged. And we do that by working in community, by building capacity, and by advocating. And a major focus of what we do is systems change.
Yeah.
Because that's a hard, it's a hard area for a lot of folks to grasp why it's important. When we look at an urban issue or any kind of issue, right, in community, a lot of times we want to say, well, that person should be doing this to fix it. And sure. I know you have a background and awareness with Ashley, with your wife, and mm-hmm. issues around homelessness and in issues around substance use disorder and in counseling issues. And so a lot of people feel like that's a personal thing. That's an individual thing.
Sure.
But we see that all people think about financial resources as being personal issues. Housing, transportation, but they're really not, right? They're the product of a system. Yes. If you see a woman wheeling herself in a wheelchair down the street, she did not decide, oh, this would be a great place for me to be safe and secure. There's no sidewalk for her.
Right.
So you may think she made a personal choice to put herself at risk and to hold up traffic, but it's decades of making of an environment. And we can't fix that problem by telling her, use the sidewalk, because the sidewalk doesn't go where she needs to be.
Right.
So that's a systems discussion. And it's about a lot of different players making changes to the way they think about planning and resource investment, not about an individual doing their job better. And the way you explain systems is through stories.
Yes.
It's not by giving you the budget of 6 different agencies and showing you their 5-year plan.
Yes.
Because we don't take in information that way.
Right.
We take in information by thinking about, was it that woman's fault? Well, no, that's wrong. That's unfair to blame her for that. So systems work is about storytelling. And that's what makes it so, I think, rewarding when you connect with someone in a way that explains something that wasn't clear before. And that's what also makes it so challenging.
Yeah.
Because you have to find a frame that resonates with the person that or group of people that you're speaking with.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of systems work here because we think that it's that old story about you're standing on the bank of a river and people are being washed down. You're pulling them out and you're helping them, but they keep coming down well, do you just keep doing the pulling out, or do you go up and say, who's throwing people in the river?
Go upstream, right?
You go upstream. And I'm a little anxious about the upstream because I think we tend to feel like I can chase this back to some ultimate origin, and I don't think
that
that's
terminology.
the way systems work.
Yeah.
But
that upstream for folks who may not be in the same professions that Leilah and I are in. There's upstream and downstream problems. Part of the system analysis, and that upstream kind of terminology is something that's common in these types of discussions, but also maybe, again, talking about language and making sure people understand that might not be commonplace around everybody's dinner table or coffee shop, that when they're talking about the problem that they're having, well, I should go figure out upstream, where this started from. So just wanted to make sure folks listening or watching understood that you and I were talking about upstream, but they might not have connected with that. So.
And literally, quite literally, you work with upstream problems in your career.
I literally work with flowing rivers that have upstream problems, yes. A little different from the systems where we might actually be able to pinpoint, here is the problem where we need to implement a flood mitigation project or something. But go
Steve,
on and describe. Yeah, please.
I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
So don't you think that your career with basically systems work, with looking at environmental systems and looking at interaction, don't you think that has informed your interest in these questions and in 100%. How you describe that?
Absolutely. The work that I've been doing for the last, since I met you in 2001, so 24, and prior to that, so 25 years, work that I've been doing professionally in mostly the public sector, has all led to this appreciation of the intersection of all of these different systems and how everything is connected, and the ignorance that we can have as individuals and as collective individuals, as groups, to understanding how the interplay of all of these things, that one thing that happens here can have all of these other consequences, intended or not, unintended consequences, so that it's immensely complicated, and we may never grasp all of the interconnections. But if we're not consciously acknowledging these interconnections, and how are we trying to improve them, we're never going to solve these problems, whether it's a housing issue or an environmental issue. All of these things are interconnected, and I was imagining, as you were starting to talk about systems change, and the lady in the wheelchair going down the street, and the sidewalk issue that you brought up, those were policy choices made decades ago when that part of the town was developed. My mind went to like redlining, back in the 20th century, that was a policy decision that people are still feeling impacts of today, which maybe that lady whirling down the street might have been, impacted by a 1930s era, 40s era decision about where home loans could go, or not, because why build sidewalks for community that we don't care about, was kind of the thought process of some of our policymakers back in the previous decades that we're living with today. So
let me take a little diversion into visual narrative, visual storytelling, right? And because another potential scenario there is that she lives in a kind of second ring suburb that was developed in the 60s, where it was so car centric that having a sidewalk indicated that people were walking as opposed to driving to and from. And the idea that you had a beautiful lawn with no interruption and no sidewalk conveyed something about the socioeconomic status and who lived in the community. And so we built lots of neighborhoods deliberately without sidewalks. And the visual narrative that told back in when it was built is different than what it tells now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And as those neighborhoods, some of them have declined, then people are stuck. And those decades of choices about who we're building for and how we design the environment and what the story that the built environment conveys to us, that's another way of establishing a narrative.
100%. Something else that triggered as you were talking about your current job, and the significance of narrative in identifying current systems and then looking for improvements to those systems. And kind of our earlier conversation a little bit about collaboration as well. So we live in a country that is dominated by a narrative of the individual. That, I mean, it's a mythology, right? I mean, it's not real. Like, there are, like, the Wild West and the cowboy that tamed the West on their own. That didn't happen. Like, that's not at all reality. But we certainly have this ethos as a nation, and it's stronger in different pockets of the country. But I think nationwide we have this lone wolf, do it by yourself, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, type of self-made millionaire. All of these.
Not to be, that's a random, non-specific example. I'm sure
Right.
That last one.
Of course, but all of that's nonsense. All of that isn't real. But yet it is such a powerful narrative that I think I'm imagining intersects a lot of your work. Again, the lady on the street, and this idea of, well, she should fix her own problem. Like, she got herself into that problem. She should fix the problem by herself, because that's what I do. And we fail, I think, often as individuals and collectively to recognize that our national narrative of do it by yourself is wrong. It's not accurate. It's not how things get done. And it perpetuates these societal problems, because we can then just blame the person who's in that situation, that, well, they're just not doing enough to get themselves to get them out of that situation. So one, I guess, do you agree with my interpretation that I just laid out? And two, then if we're in the right ballpark, how do you combat that narrative that's so powerful in our nation, of the individual triumphing over nature and economy and everything?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, it's kind of funny the examples you used. I'm lucky in that I have two teenage daughters who both, the same experience I had growing up, I have that with them. And we get to talk a lot about these issues. And I was just talking with my high school junior about the mythology of the American West and the idea of what a cowboy did,
Yeah.
and the reality of what that westward expansion was like. And she was kicking around ideas for how you convey that in, of all things, a puppet show. But this discussion overlaps a lot with the discussions you and I have actually had about art and the role of art and the role of media in creating these stereotypes, which certainly that's really where they come from. I have another kiddo who's in college studying theater and film, and if you look at the story that we tell about ourselves as a country, that's the vehicle. We don't tell enough stories about the partly because it's hard to use. There's that old experiment, and you show a picture. Also, this is right up your river area. You show a photograph to a group of Americans, and it's there's a salmon and some plants, and and the Americans say, you say, what is this? And Americans say, well, that's a fish. And you show it to Japanese people and they say that's a river.
Yeah.
So how do we, and that may even be apocryphal, but it's a good story.
Yeah.
So how do we tell stories about the river and not stories about the fish, right?
Yeah.
And how do we make those as compelling as what we've come to be, kind of used to? And I think this is another point where the science really backs this up. You can't sit down with someone and say, hey, Stephen, you're wrong. You're wrong. Your beliefs are incorrect. You may think this happened, but here's the data that shows that didn't really happen.
Right.
Because we actually know what happens when you proceed that way.
Yep.
You upset someone's apple cart so profoundly that they deepen their adherence
They will.
to their incorrect
Yep.
beliefs.
They'll shut down. They'll wall themselves off in a defensive posture, and yeah, absolutely, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So we've actually been talking about this. One of the things we've been talking about is, you know, just to take a real serious turn here for a minute,
yeah,
hundreds of people die on the streets of San Antonio every year. Some of them in their 90s, some of them infants.
yeah,
So it's, in some ways, it's easier for someone to walk past an individual in real life than it is for them to hear a story about a woman who went to high school somewhere, who went to church somewhere, who, because you're starting to construct that this person was part of a community.
yeah. It's part of.
And there's a big difference between saying this guy suffered from this and my saying, hey, a Churchill grad, this is what happened to him. Because immediately you've put it in a frame of, that's the high school I went to.
Yeah.
And that's a person who has something in common with me.
Yeah.
And so
getting personalized and connected.
I think that's how we move forward, right? Is we try to get more into people's spaces. Right now, we are really differentiating ourselves. If you don't use these words, you don't wear this kind of thing, you're not, then you are not part of my.
Yep.
And we know billions of years of evolution teach us to wall ourselves off and to protect us and our own.
Get into our tribes and
and
know who the enemy is. Yeah.
Right. Where does that go?
Yeah.
How do we become more inclusive? How do we realize that my tribe includes not only all the people, but also the plants,
right?
the planet,
right?
That's the trick, right? And I don't think it's done. Forgive me for saying this. I don't think it's done with data. I think it's done with stories and with connecting people through the webs, making those invisible webs visible.
Yes. Yeah.
You may think you're not connected to this person, but actually her sister is the one who took care of your kids at that daycare. And that, without her in your life, you would have a different life. You would be a different person. You would have different opportunities. And I think that's that story of America. It's not about one person going out and taming the West. It's about the school teachers, the folks who already lived there, the people who understood how to utilize indigenous resources. Like that's a much more complicated story than one family or one man went out and fenced off some land and put cattle on it. Right. So yeah, I think that how do you make those connections visible? That to me is the path, the path forward.
Yeah. Well, I love this conversation, and I could keep, just going and going and going. But I also know that there's a hard stop coming up for you in a little bit. So thank you again for all the time you've given and for participating in this discussion, which is fascinating to me. But let me transition into just to make sure we get kind of the things that we talk about here on the show, giving you an opportunity. What's your call to action? What, as we've been talking here about the importance of narrative, particularly in social issues and some of the work that you're doing in San Antonio and your organization does around the country. What do you want people to do now that they've heard this discussion and are hopefully energized about connecting and being more engaged in their community and in a larger inclusive community? What do you want people to do with this discussion?
I want to preface this by saying this has been fabulous. Like just to repeat what you said, I could talk about this stuff all day. So unfortunately, no one pays me to do that. Similar to your situation, right? So. I mean, one thing I would say is if you casually use language or metaphors or phrases, interrogate your own use of that. And a really interesting example of this is we had a big buy local campaign here. And I'm sure people are familiar with buy local campaigns. And we decided, well, we need to understand more. We need to ask people more specifically, when this language is used, what does it mean to you? Mm-hmm. So, for example, in that survey, we also asked people, what does a home have to have a yard? And 70-something% of the people said, yeah, unless it has a yard, it's not a home. Well,
Wow.
that's not the way a lot of us in the sector use that word home, right?
Yeah.
But one of the questions that we asked was, do you try to buy local? And most people, 80%, said, yes, I do. So then we said, can you give an example of a local? And some people said, Walmart.
Yeah.
Or the corner gas station, and I get what they're saying. That is not online. It is a local place that they go.
It's in their community. Right.
But we're all having these huge conversations and spending millions of dollars telling people buy local, and we're not even talking to them in a way that makes sense to them.
Yeah.
But think about that from yourself. When you hear someone using a word, or you hear something, particularly if it's something that you feel like you're being exhorted to do, interrogate that a little bit.
Yeah.
What do they mean? And what do I understand that they mean by that? And so I think that's one thing that we can all do. The other thing I would encourage people, and I know I already said this to you, but read some on this. If you feel like you can argue someone into submission, read some on why that doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Love it.
I mentioned Haidt. I think he's great. If you're, there are some other books there about the big narrative arcs. There's a book called Mind the Science about the way science around thinking and understanding can be used to manipulate us.
Yep.
There's a book, and I can't remember the name of the book right now, but about the way that narratives around something being natural manipulate us into spending money we don't need to spend.
Natural, organic, and
Yes. Mm-hmm. What is organic? What is natural? There's no definition for the word natural in food or any other products. And so pause for a minute and think about, when I see this word, what's it triggering in me? Try to become more aware of the frames that you're using and why you're responding in a way. And I think it'll help you understand other people more, but it'll also help you understand, why did I disagree with that person? That may not actually make a lot of sense. So I think that is what that sort of self-awareness. And then just in general, a lot of these discussions, they're really wonderful. Make yourself open to them. As you start reading about this, I know it sounds goofy, but ask someone, hey, have you read this book? Have you thought about these issues? People won't have conversations with someone else if there's not an opening, to learn.
Invite people.
So that connection to talk about it, become an evangelist or for the idea of systems thinking, and do some reading on systems thinking.
Yeah, right on. We've got, by my clock, 2 to 3 minutes left before you got to run. So I'm going to ask you the 3 questions about hope. So, and your challenge then will be to be succinct so that I can get all 3 questions in the time before you have got to run to your next meeting. So just your first gut reaction to these questions. So the first question about hope is, what's your vision for a better future? It could be for you personally, professionally, or for the world. What's your vision for a better future?
A personal vision that I'm really working on is this consumer issue, and particularly not consuming things that are overpackaged, and just trying to cut out plastic as much as I can. That's really very personal. I'm not doing any policy or any other work in that. But a professional vision around a better future is that we move away from the kind of check the box mentality that you were talking about. And I'm not implicating any particular, but and a lot of folks are implicit in promoting that. And I love KPIs, but sometimes, just a real quick story.
Yeah.
I have a friend who in 7th grade did a field trip, and she was just blown away by the historic missions, by the San Antonio missions.
Yeah.
And she thought, this is where I want to be, right? So she grew up, she graduated from high school, she married her high school sweetheart, she dropped out of college, she had a bunch of kids. When she was in her 30s, she said, back in 7th grade, I took that field trip. I want to go back and do that. And she became an archaeologist, and she became the city archaeologist of the city of San Antonio, and she became a nationally recognized expert. Now, if you had a KPI that said, did these 7th graders get something out of this trip, you would never be able to measure her story.
Yeah.
So let's be aware that, yes, we need outcomes, we need outputs, but that outcomes can be hard to measure.
Hard
So
to
I would
measure.
love to see us get a more nuanced idea of how we recognize what quality of life is and how we evaluate outcomes, so that we're not, we're not focused on the wrong measures for what makes a meaningful life.
So I think you answered the second question, which is why that's important. I think you
Yeah.
just explained. Is there anything else
Yeah.
you want to add into the why your vision of that is important?
It's a deeply personal thing with me, and I've attended a Quaker meeting here in San Antonio. You can't really be a Quaker alone.
Yeah,
You have to be in community.
in a meeting, right? Yeah.
And I really feel pretty strongly that we need to understand how deeply entrenched in community we are. If you are sitting alone at your house watching TV, you are thoroughly enmeshed in community.
Yep.
There are hundreds of thousands of people that contributed to your being able to do what you want to do that evening. And most of what you think you know, this is the great experiment where we ask people to draw a bicycle. Almost no one can actually draw a bicycle that functions. But even if you sit, you're like, how is this connected? Like, I don't know, right? Most people couldn't fix their plumbing if it went wrong. Nobody knows how these work, right? Yeah. But we're dependent on them. So everything you do, you're enmeshed in community. Recognize that, celebrate that. If we understood that more, I think we would make decisions that reflect how deeply dependent we are on people. Most of what you know is not in your brain. Most of what you know and most of who you are is shared now globally.
Yeah.
And if we could really be deeply thankful for all of that, and for the billions of years of evolutionary history and hundreds of thousands of years of human evolutionary history that got us to the point where we're able to share knowledge at this level, I think that would make all of our lives better. That sense of gratitude for the web that supports us.
Yeah. Perfect. In the minute we have left before we got to go, now imagine we're in that future where we understand we're connected and we're deeply embedded into community and we're functioning and making better choices based on that understanding. How do you feel?
I like to think that as I have gotten older, and this has been I'm in my 50s now, it's been this unexpected bonus. Peace becomes so much more of a priority.
Yeah.
And something that would have looked dull and uninteresting when I was 20 becomes rich and satisfying. And so I think that when you talk about peace, or when I talk about it, and that famous quote, it's not the absence of violence or war, right? Peace is the productive coexistence of all kinds of communities, people communities, environmental communities. And so I think that, ultimately what I would hope, and in my own life, I hope I'm moving towards it, is a more peaceful existence.
Perfect. Well, Leilah, thank you so much. And I know we had to kind of truncate this a little bit so you can get on to your next appointment. But thank you so much for taking time to join me today and sharing all that you've shared. I think the world of you and consider you one of my dearest friends. So thank you for being a part of this show with me and sharing your wisdom and inspiration with everybody.
I'm so honored to be asked. It was, and it's fine to say, well, we could have had a few more minutes, but there is no amount of time that we could have dedicated to this conversation where we would walk away saying, oh, we covered everything.
We covered it all. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
So I had a great time, and you stirred up a lot of interesting thoughts that I want to pursue. So maybe we'll check back in a few years.
I hope
so. And talk about the next phase of both of our work.
where we've grown. Yeah.
All right.
Perfect. Well,
Thanks.
Leilah, take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
What an incredible conversation with Leilah Powell. Today, she reminded us that storytelling isn't just a tool for connection. It's a fundamental driver of change. We talked about the necessity of belonging, the power of narratives to shape our understanding, and how genuine community engagement, not just checking a box, leads to real solutions. Most importantly, Leilah emphasized that systems change isn't just about collecting data and crunching numbers. It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of issues and using stories to shift perceptions, drive policy, and empower communities. Think of systems change like a river. Data gives us the depth and width of its water. It tells us where the currents are strong and where obstacles lie. But without the stories of the people who rely on that river, those who fish its waters, who build their homes along its banks, who face floods and droughts, we don't truly understand its impact. Numbers may show us where a problem exists, but stories show us why it matters and how we can fix it. If we want to transform the systems that shape our communities, we have to change the narratives that uphold them. Leilah's work is a testament to this truth, and I can't thank her enough for sharing her insights with us today. Her dedication to empowering communities, amplifying voices, and fostering real engagement is an inspiration, and I hope you all have taken as much from this conversation as I have. Now, from those of you tuning in, whether you're listening or watching, Leilah's story reminds us that change starts with us. Here are some simple but meaningful actions you can take in your own community. Listen to your neighbors' stories and uplift their voices. Get involved with local organizations working for systemic change. Advocate for policies that prioritize people over statistics. And most importantly, recognize that belonging, connection, and engagement are not just ideals. They are necessities for building stronger, more inclusive communities. If this episode inspired you, please share it with your family and friends. Like and follow Stories Sustain Us, leave me a comment, and help continue these important conversations. Your support truly makes a difference, so thank you. And don't forget to join me for the next episode coming out on March 4th. I'll be talking with another incredible guest about the complexities of mental health systems and the collaborative efforts needed to create real change. We'll explore the role of community support and policymakers in addressing the mental health needs of children and youth. This is a really fascinating conversation, and you're not going to want to miss it. So check out the next episode of Stories Sustain Us on March 4th at storiessustainus.com, wherever you listen to podcasts, and on YouTube. So thank you for being with me here today. Please keep sharing and keep believing in the power of stories to sustain us all. Until next time, I'm Stephen Schauer. Please take care of yourself and each other. Take care.